Hey, what's going on, everyone? So I'll wait a little bit for people to jump in. Today, I'm drinking one of my favorite probiotic drinks. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen these around. So try to have like a few of these a week. I always kind of get different flavors because this company in particular has always like a myriad of different flavors, and they're always pretty good. So yeah, just one of my favorite brands. I get no kickbacks. Just kind of showing you what I enjoy to drink on the weekends. Hey, what up, Rima? I haven't seen you in ages. We got to catch up soon. Hope everything's well. I also honestly hope that my sweater isn't picking up the mic here, because sometimes when I wear sweaters, the mic tends to kind of scratch against the sweater the entire time. So, okay. So you guys, we're going to take my time on this one today because it is an important subject. And honestly, there's so much to cover in this subject, and I'm only going to hit up like the 10 big points that I thought of off the top of my head. But just know you could expand on a lot of these subjects. And also, just without actually meeting a person and knowing their individual needs, it's always kind of tough to give health advice on anything. So keep in mind that these are like 10 important topics that I would focus on myself personally. But without, of course, meeting the person and knowing their lifestyle and demands and goals, et cetera, it's tough to give. It's tough to give advice. And I'm still visiting my parents here in Las Vegas, so I'm trying to figure out how to work the lighting with their one lamp here and stuff of that sort. So, okay. So the topic today is a very important topic. Hector, what's going on? I saw a few other people jumped in as well. And we're going to talk about 10 ways to understand stress and fat gain, in particular how it impacts fat gain. So this is pretty common today, and the 10 things I'm going to cover aren't in any order of importance. So I'm just going to cover them randomly, and each topic is going to be more important for certain people than other people, et cetera, et cetera. Give me one sec. Okay, I'm going to open this. Each topic is going to be more important for certain people versus other people. So you got to determine your specific situation and how they apply to you. And some of the things may not apply to you altogether. So let's go ahead and begin. So the first thing I want to cover in terms of stress management and central nervous system management, and I hate using the word management, but because it implies that it's going to stay around forever. And at the end of the day, I'm just hoping you guys will engineer a lifestyle that doesn't cause a tremendous amount of chronic stress, in particular micro and macro stresses also, because that's going to be the best form of quote unquote stress management. You kind of want to generally stay away from, working a super stressful job and then figuring out how to manage that stress or something of that sort. Because usually that kind of is good for damage control, but eventually the kind of dam will crumble because the cracks are formed. It's just with stress management practices, those cracks may form slower, but they form nonetheless, and eventually the deterioration will happen to a certain threshold where the dam will break, right? And you see adrenal burnout and just burnout in jobs quite often today. 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically unwell, 90%. And I'm not even exaggerating that number either. So this is very important to consider. And a lot of times when people embark on a health journey, they don't even take this in consideration. They usually manage it through like diet and exercise, and for the most part, medical drugs of various sorts, either psychiatric drugs or drugs used to manage high blood pressure and stuff of that sort. So the first topic I want to cover, and this is out of 10 important topics in terms of central nervous system management, is kind of like it's important to, I guess, understand how the central nervous system has ideally evolved to function. And you guys have to remember, like, what is the role of the central nervous system? And the central nervous system being the brain, which is encased in a skull. Obviously, it never sees the outside world. It uses the 5 human senses to gather various information and then use that information to enhance your survival. And the central nervous system, again, is the brain, but also the spinal column and all of the nerves that go through it or from it into different parts of your body to help manage your visceral tissue and your muscle tissue, et cetera, okay? So the whole point of the central nervous system is just to get you to survive better in the external world. And that's it. There's really no other purpose for it. And in fact, if you take into consideration a lot of your motivations in life, pretty much actually all of your motivations in life, you will see it always goes back to survival. And that's it. And of course, a lot of people build like fantasies around why they're motivated to do something, or, they build like religious practices or spiritual practices, or, you hear things like things happen for a reason because there's a higher message, et cetera, et cetera. And for sure, there is a lesson to be learned in some things, but I don't think it's like a higher message sent by the universe, in my opinion, personally. And just some like easy examples of how the central nervous system is just geared to get you to survive better in the external world is, let's look at some basic ideas. Like, people go like, like I go to college. I'm like, why do you go to college? So I can get an education and I can get like a better paying job, maybe more social prestige, maybe better connections at college as well, because you could make some great friends. And like, why do you need that stuff? Why do you need connections, education, better paying job? So I can live in a better neighborhood and, have a better chance of meeting the right partner because I'm like more socially acceptable because I have a good job and I have good pay, et cetera, et cetera. And why is that? And then you could just keep asking this indefinitely. And then you would ask, why is that important? And it always goes back to, because it gets you to survive better. Obviously, having more money will get you to survive better, having more partners. There's a good book called The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. Will get you to, mate more and then reproduce more kids, and thus your genes will survive better. Living in a better neighborhood will get you to survive better because it's safer most of the time, et cetera, almost all the time, et cetera, et cetera. So it always goes back to survival. And another good, unique example of how the central nervous system is just geared to get you to survive better in the external world is simply like people that go on enlightenment paths or spiritual paths, for example. Like, why do you want to become enlightened? Like I want to become enlightened because it'll help me understand the world better, and I'll be able to have less stress, and I'll be able to just move through the world with less friction, and ideas will come to me more easily, and money and relationships will happen easily, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll be sought after, and I'll be seen as this kind of guru, and people will look up to me. And why is all that important? Just so you could survive better. And that's it. And even something as like selfless as having kids is actually just another form of the central nervous system getting you to survive better. And of course, it builds then belief systems or fantasies to basically overemphasize just a very simple biological process that really happens to everyone. So like, why do you want kids? And there are a myriad of reasons. I'm just kind of simplifying this discussion. Like I want kids because my genes will be passed on. So obviously that's a form of survival. Or, someone can take care of me when I'm old. Well, that's a form of enhancing your survival. Or, so I could blend into my tribe. Like a lot of women feel time sensitive to having kids because they want to fit in. And a lot of their friends maybe have had kids in their 20s or early 30s. And now they're maybe 35 or 38 and they don't have kids. Et cetera, et cetera. So you have to remember the human, like I mentioned in the beginning of the call, the human brain has been in a skull its whole entire life. It's never seen the outside world. And the central nervous system hasn't really evolved pretty much a significant amount in over 200 years of the Homo sapien existence. And there have been, like 28 human species that have come and gone over the years, okay? And all of them have gone extinct, including one of my favorite ones, the Neanderthals. They're around for around 200,000 years, or maybe 250,000. I don't know the exact timeline, but then they vanished, and I'm pretty sure for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years they thought they would be around forever, and the Homo sapien, which is basically who we are, is the last human species on Earth, and who knows? We're pretty young as well, I think 200,000 years at this point. And there have been some human species that are around for hundreds or hundreds of thousands or maybe a million years and also vanished. So during all of that evolution, the mind has always been encased in the skull and it hasn't seen the outside world. So although we're living in a modern age, the central nervous system still thinks you're basically like a caveman with a small little tribe. And if you disappoint this tribe, you'll be an outcast. And obviously humans, one of their greatest strengths is they're able to coordinate effort, among many people, et cetera, et cetera. You get, Huge enterprises are a good example, or militaries, stuff of this sort of huge corporations. They're a perfect example of how humans can get together and work as a team and accomplish great things, et cetera, et cetera. And going back to the example with the women wanting kids, for them, the mind just thinks like, oh, if I'm not going to have kids, I'm not going to blend in with my tribe, and I'm going to be an outcast. But dude, there are like 2 million people in any city. You're not going to be an outcast. Trust me. Dammer, good to see you. Hopefully I pronounced your name right. Chris, good to see you. I saw some other people jumped in. Let me see. Hector, Michael, Rima is still here. Good to see you guys. So, like, oh, why do you want kids? I can blend in with the tribe better, and I can have more friends, and I could look like I'm progressing in my life just so I could survive better, etc., etc. So it always goes back to survival, and there's nothing really, in my opinion, that magical about like basic biological processes. But moreover, these fantasies are built upon them just to kind of keep the story going, etc., etc. But one of the ways the central nervous system has evolved to survive optimally, Greg, good to see you, is basically not to be bombarded with a tremendous amount of micro stressors. So let's look back 10,000 years before the cultivation of crops and the domestication of various animals, I think starting with sheep and goat. So before farming came around, everyone was a hunter and gatherer. And there was no specialists either. Everyone was basically like a generalist in their occupation, and everyone roamed the earth, etc., etc. And for my area, which is like for Moldova and Ukraine, although I lived back when I lived there, it's still the Soviet Union, so I consider it still part of one country. You have a small tribe. They go hunting mammoths, right? And let's say it's the winter, and you go to this hunt, and it's quite stressful, right? And you might lose a person, or a person gets injured. And remember, these animals are like super huge, and it's not like you have like a 308 hunting rifle. Pretty much have spears for the most part. And even Neanderthals would even run up and actually spear these animals to death by running up to them. It's the Homo sapien that developed the ability to actually throw a spear, and also domesticate the wolf and incorporate them into their hunting practices. So basically, they would get the wolves to kind of surround the animal. The animal would get very kind of confused, and be locked in place. And then they would kind of just throw spears at these animals to death, etc., which would make it a lot safer for the Homo sapien, and also reduce a tremendous amount of calories required for the hunt, because now the animal is stationary, it doesn't continue to run, and it's easy to surround it and then kill the animal at that point for food and extract calories from that food. And in fact, one of the biggest roles of the central nervous system, and even the evolution of space and time, which isn't fundamental, is basically meant to just determine how many calories you expand per movement or per activity. So the space, the evolution of being able to comprehend space is meant to basically gauge at like, okay, so if I have to go walk like 10 miles in this direction to gather 1,000 calories, but the 10 miles burns 1,000 calories, then it's not worth it for me to get it. But if there's another animal or some maybe wild forage over here that gets me also 1,000 calories, but it's only 5 miles away, then it is worth it. And that way it uses space and time to gauge at how many calories you need to burn, and if that payoff or investment is going to be worth it and puts you in the positive, because inevitably you need to be in either a neutral or positive caloric state, or you slowly obviously starve to death because your body can't create calories out of nothing. When it creates calories out of quote unquote nothing, that nothing is coming from your fat storage, and eventually when that gets too low, it comes from your muscle tissue, and eventually when that gets too low, it comes from your visceral tissue, and then eventually you end up dying of starvation, right, at a certain point. So unlike plants, which have roots to gather nutrients from the soil food web, humans have basically their arms and legs, and they have to go venture out and get that food, et cetera, okay? So basically, going back to the hunting example, I mean, the hunt is quite stressful, all right? So again, imagine like these animals are basically like even bigger than an elephant with huge tusks, quite aggressive as well, and they're usually in a pack also. So it's not even just one. And that stressful situation, I would consider like a macro stressor, and it kind of peaks the cortisol. Cortisol is basically released by your adrenal glands, which kind of like is a spongy tissue that sits on top of both of your kidneys. And cortisol is a limited supply in your body. It's like an alertness hormone. Without cortisol, it's a good thing. Without cortisol, you'll basically be like a zombie, okay? And your body pumps this out, but it has, just like with everything, it has a limited supply. So it can't keep pumping out this cortisol, right? Because eventually what would happen if the cortisol is just constantly released through a tremendous amount of chronic stress, maybe in a person's life, the body's like, well, I need to reserve this for emergency situations. So like if a tiger pops out of nowhere, I can pump cortisol into this person's body. It instantly jars them into like a state of awakeness. Just imagine like extremely powerful coffee, stuff of that sort. And then they're able to run away, right? So it needs to preserve that for those situations, because remember that, again, I'm going to keep circling back to this. The central nervous system, its only role is to get you to survive better in the external world, and that's it. It has really no other role or purpose. It's evolved just to do that, and it'll try to do that to the best of its abilities. So by realizing that cortisol is being output on a chronic basis, the body's like, well, I need to shut it down and bring it back a bit, because I'm not going to have it available for emergency situations. And in that case, the person experiences adrenal fatigue. Okay, so adrenal fatigue is a very umbrella term, but basically some symptoms of adrenal fatigue, you'll notice it come when two extremes. You either can't sleep at all, or you sleep way too much but are still tired. Some other examples of adrenal fatigue could be you even start economizing and thinking about how much energy it'll take you to, for example, get up out of bed, walk to put on your clothes, wash your face really quick, go to the car, open the car door, sit in the car, close the car door, drive to the grocery store. Except once you start kind of strategizing that way and economizing energy that way, that could be a very common symptom of adrenal fatigue, okay, that you're already in the late stages of adrenal fatigue, meaning you've had chronic stress for a very long time at that point, and it hasn't been managed well or eliminated, and your body is now starting to basically kind of like shut down, etc., etc. So the thing with the central nervous system is, for example, this hunt is completed, so there's a tremendous amount of stress, but in the hunter-gatherer days, then you have long valleys or long periods of like really nothing going on. So you're out in the forest, you have your little tribe, you're eating nothing but wild game, wild fish, you're drinking well-sourced water that doesn't have like a myriad of different chemicals, just water out of the faucet. In any city will have probably like trace amounts of 200 different industrial or chemicals or biocides or different pharmaceuticals in there from people's peeing out their pharmaceutical drugs. Like, for example, almost like 35% of females in the US are on some type of psychiatric medication. And most Americans are, at least 80% of Americans, I think last time I checked, are on some type of medical drug, okay? And that's all making it into the public water system. And the filters aren't good at filtering out all these pharmaceutical chemicals. So every time you drink out of like a faucet, you're also getting a good dose of like God knows how many of these chemical altering chemicals. And once they get into your body to a certain degree, it kind of disrupts its natural balance. And good luck figuring out how to come up with solutions to that. It's definitely a mess. So anyways, the hunter and gatherers, they're in the forest, they're out in the sun all day, they don't have any like synthetic clothing, etc., etc. And many weeks, especially in the winter, a mammoth could last quite a long time. Even many months can go by without a stressful event happening again. Okay? And then the stressful event would happen again. So that's how the central nervous system, in short, has evolved to function, to have a peak stress and valleys of literally nothing going on. But today, unfortunately, for most people, you have a lot of macro stresses. So these peak stress moments combined with a gargantuous amount and never ending, it seems like, amount of micro stressors. These little things that people always discount, especially in the Western world, as a normal part of living, but it's not normal at all. Just unfortunately in the US, the population has normalized mental and physical pathology to such a such a far extent that even people that are extremely mentally and physically unwell don't even consciously perceive themselves as mentally and physically unwell, because that's just their normal state, okay? So today, like for example, you have, the average, I'm just going to go on averages here, but the average American sleeping 5 hours a day, they get up, they're already quite fatigued. And if you're not in the late stages of adrenal fatigue, lack of sleep always amplifies stress. Notice how much more grouchy or triggered you could be when you have poor sleep versus when you have good sleep. So now your perception and personal experience of stress is going to be amplified, which is going to release a lot more cortisol in your body and deplete that limited reserve quite faster, and also cause a tremendous amount of negative cascade of events in your body, and the HPA regulation in particular, and stuff of this sort, okay? So person gets up, 5 hours of sleep, they have coffee, that's going to spike their cortisol a tremendous amount. That coffee is probably laced with like 10 or different biocides that are grown, that are used to grow the coffee bean. And then obviously when you heat up these biocides, they even cause new chemicals to form, which are even more toxic. And we have no safety studies on that done whatsoever. And honestly, it's not like there are any safety studies done on pesticides in the US anyways. That's another huge misconception, because how the market works these days is the chemical companies are just required to test the active ingredient in isolation on its own in laboratory settings, and it's never used that way. So in any chemical formulation, you're going to get an active ingredient, which is the main player of that particular biocide, whether it's a pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, etc., etc. But then you also have like a myriad of inactive ingredients, which are usually kept secret as well. And it's these inactive ingredients that are put into the chemical formulation to enhance the potency and also the lifespan of the active ingredient. And when you honestly take those inactive ingredients out, you will see that the active ingredient, the lethality kind of goes down quite quickly, okay? But when you throw those inactive ingredients in there, it becomes far more lethal. And so a lot of consumers think like they're taking the entire complete formulation, which is what you would find at Home Depot or whatever, and spraying it on a particular food and seeing if it's safe at that point. But that's not how it happens. They only test the active ingredient in isolation on its own, and that's it. And of course, it's going to pass safety testings at that point. And also on top of that, I mean, this is such a long conversation and almost comical at this point. On top of that, they're done in-house by the chemical companies, by their staff. That's the safety testing. And then they're sent to the FDA for a review, okay? The FDA doesn't even do the initial rounds of the review process of the safety testing of these various biocides, all right? And pretty much all of these chemicals in one degree or another have been proven to disrupt certain systems in your body, whether it's your gut microbiome, cause various cancers, cause various thyroid issues, cause various central nervous system issues, etc., etc. And you're not getting only exposed to one active ingredient in isolation on its own. You're getting exposed to a myriad of different chemicals. And in fact, I forgot the exact number, but I think the average American, I'll have to check, but the average American newborn born in a metropolitan area in America is born with around trace amounts of 200 different chemicals in their bloodstream already, which is startling. And I know a lot of people are going to say like, oh, we're living longer, blah, blah, blah. It's not true. In fact, just hunter-gatherers without any medicine or medical degrees or nutrition education, once you take child mortality out of the equation, pretty much lived as long as people today. But in my opinion, people today, especially in the US, at a spiritual level and in the thinking and emotional dimension as well, die at about age 30, but at a biological level, they keep, living just like in a zombie-like state, mainly because of like an addiction to medical drugs, et cetera, the average American lifespan is like 76 years old. But look at the quality of the lifespan. The quality of the lifespan is super low, very, very, very low. And in fact, anytime you step out, pretty much anywhere in the US these days, 9 out of 10 people you run into are full of obesity, misery, and disease, and medical drug addiction, and stuff of that sort. So, and that's another topic we'll cover later, but it's mainly because people are addicted to symptom management healthcare practices, and rarely, if ever, want to change the person that's causing the disease, which in my opinion is most always themselves. Almost always themselves. No absolutes, of course. There are some minor exceptions. There are kids, unfortunately, that are born with cancer, and it's obviously not their fault, etc., etc. But I think you guys know what I'm getting at, and it is definitely true. So circling back, I go off on these tangents just because I get kind of very passionate about these subjects. But circling back, the central nervous system has evolved once again to not deal with micro stresses on a chronic basis. And that's what a lot of Americans deal with today. So they get up, they're in traffic, which is quite stressful. They get to work, a lot of deadlines at work, a lot of hours at work for a lot of people. Then you combine the office politics and bureaucracy of most work. Then they go to lunch, highly inflammatory foods, which are also stressful in the central nervous system. Then they get back, maybe something going on with their boss or some coworker not doing their share of the work, which causes you more stress. Then you get back on the freeway, more traffic. Then you get home, another highly inflammatory foods with like a myriad of different biocides. You're basically eating Chernobyl in every meal. Maybe a not happy life at home either. A lot of people are in relationships they don't want to be in that are very taxing and stressful, and taken away from the person's vitality instead of replenishing them when they get home, which is how it should be. And then they get to sleep late once again, get up 5 hours of work. I think Robert Kiyosaki mentioned the average American has like I forgot exactly, but like $900 to $1,000 to their name. So obviously that puts the person's central nervous system in a fight or flight situation. They're constantly on edge because one financial lapse in any one direction, all of a sudden the person is under, right? And look at 80% of American personal bankruptcies in the US, they're due to actually health issues, okay? And if you consider 9 out of 10 Americans right now metabolically unhealthy and 80% of bankruptcies are due to health issues, I think if we don't change course and start teaching people on just how to live like human beings again in the US, there'll be another huge financial disaster in the next couple of years. I wouldn't even say maybe even under a decade. That's even going to be far greater than what happened during the shutdowns and far greater than what happened during the mortgage collapse in like 2008 or 2007. I forget exactly. So something to consider. And currently we are spending close to $300 billion a year, I believe last time I checked, on just helping obese people with their health problems every single year. And not to stigmatize obese people, there are a lot of very thin people too that are very metabolically unhealthy. Just because you're thin doesn't mean you're healthy either, Could have gut issues, could have high blood pressure issues, mental issues, orthopedic issues, on and on, et cetera, et cetera. So in short, try to establish a life where you don't have this bombardment of micro stressors, having to deal with bills here, having to deal with work politics here, having to deal with this here, having to deal with traffic here, et cetera, et cetera. And how you go about doing that is going to vary from person to person, okay? This is why it's tough to give health advice on these lives, because there are no absolutes. And nature is a novelty generator. Nature never creates duplications of anything, okay? So you can look at a single tree and every single leaf on that tree will be completely different. From that same exact tree, even you can pick up like a handful of sand, okay? Handful of sand, and look at it, and each grain will be different as well. Same with people. So that's why it's like whenever you run into online personalities and they're saying like, do this, it'll always work, they're giving it in like absolute phrases. It's not true. It will never always work because they don't know you. And that's the equivalent of you showing up to a doctor's office and they never spoken to you before and they're like, here, just take this medication. But it's like, dude, you don't even know what's going on with me. How are you prescribing this medication? It's the same thing, even with health advice, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the big one. You got to work on reducing the total stress load. Micro stressors too, these little things, but chronically, that's where your central nervous system really has a hard time adapting and developing biological resilience. It's kind of like with working out. If you look at it, you can't work out like every day. You need rest periods to develop enough recovery so the tissue can replenish itself through proper rest and nutrition. And then you go back in a well planned out way to help develop biological resilience over time, and the tissue gets stronger and stronger. But if you're constantly bombarded with micro stressors and macro stressors constantly all the time, all you do is break the central nervous system down. And the extreme versions of are having a mental breakdown, having extreme levels of anxiety. And wherever anxiety goes chronically, depression is always going to follow close behind, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a long first bulletin point. I'm going to try to cover the other 9 way faster, okay? So apologies for stretching that out quite a bit. Let me get a sip here, kind of running out of energy. Okay, so another thing to be careful of, reframing like the negative to the positive is helpful slightly to a certain degree. But especially I hear this in business guru circles, like, oh, all you got to do is just change your frame of mind and how you look at things, and then all of a sudden you can deal with like stress left and right. Freddie, what's going on? Thank you for joining. I'm doing well. I'm here visiting my parents actually here in Las Vegas still for the holidays. I'm gonna go to some Russian store nearby to buy some food with them after this. But reframing, they're like, oh, you're stressed out because you're thinking about things wrong, or you're not seeing things like that cup is half full. To a certain extent, that is true. But look at it this way. That could be true, not true as in an absolute phase. It could be true for some people. But look at it this way. Let's say you're driving a car 100 miles and you enjoy the ride. And you're driving a car 100 miles on the same road and you're not enjoying the ride, right? The wear and tear and the gas depletion in the car is going to be roughly all the same, The wear and tear on the shocks, the brakes, the depletion of gas, oil, etc., etc. You might need to clean your windshield from time to time, so the depletion of water there. So the wear and tear on the vehicle is going to be roughly the same. So the pit stops, needing to stop at a gas station and replenish, aka rest, have more me time in your schedule, it's still going to be needed. It's not like you could drive a car indefinitely. It's like, oh, if I think positively, I can drive it even further. No, that's not how it works. And if you look at a lot of these business gurus, you'll see they look very like weathered and very much older than they actually are. They look much older than they actually are, okay? And that's because they're burning a candle on both ends. They're running unsustainable schedules, and not understanding that there are going to be limits to biology that have spent already hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to be that way. And it's a little bit of a God complex to think that, and a lot of these people are egomaniacs, obviously, to think that, oh, I'm just going to override this kind of like biology and I know better than Mother Nature. Although, the universe, I think, has been around for 11 billion years, estimated. And Earth has been around for like 4 or 5 billion years, I forget exactly. And there have been 5 mass extinctions that have come and gone to basically give rise to humans, a very complicated, extremely complicated evolution. And all of this evolution had cause and effects to why it's evolved that way, et cetera, et cetera. And all the systems are very elaborate. I think there are like many systems in the human body. In fact, the human body is a system of systems that all work together. And no one system is going to be more important than the other. All of them are equally important. Just like, how are you going to live without your heart? Or how are you going to live without your liver, or your small intestine? You know what I mean? So all of them are equally important, and all of them help each other function properly. And if any one is in a deep deficit, it drags the entire system down until the most extreme case is the person's dying. So the business gurus, in my opinion, and I've been doing this helping people with central nervous system management, fat loss, et cetera, all sorts of lifestyle variables, get healthy enough to not be on a myriad of drugs. I even had one client get off 17 different medical drugs, which is super crazy to think about, just by teaching them how to, live like a human being again, okay? Don't even focus on the symptoms. You just focus on changing the person that's causing all the symptoms, and the symptoms most always go away. So no, you can't think yourself into running yourself into the ground just by being positive, okay? Inevitably, there are limits to biology, and most central nervous systems cannot push 50, 60, 70-hour work weeks, et cetera, no matter how passionate you are about your work. And anyone that says they're doing that, just take a good, honest look at them, especially if you see them in person, and you will see they're not looking too good and most always looking quite old, much older than they are. So that's the second one. Let me cross this out. So the third one to consider, once again, none of these are more important than any other. Some are going to be more important for certain people. Some are going to be more important for other people, et cetera, et cetera. Some are going to be not important for certain people as well. So another thing that causes like a lot of stress for a person, and that's greatly overlooked, is having like a story gap in their life. This is super common. And a story gap is kind of like a stereotypical example is, let's say you want to be like an artist, but you're uncertain about, maybe there's some self-esteem issues, like no one is going to buy my art. How am I going to make a living? And remember, the central nervous system is constantly thinking, how could I get this person to survive better? So I'm going to go to a predictable occupation and field. I'm going to go and become a lawyer. Okay? Nothing wrong with being a lawyer. I'm just saying in this situation, the person genuinely just wants to be an artist. And this person goes to law school, which is quite stressful, gets a job, and maybe for the first year or two, it's really nice. They have that predictable pay. They have maybe that prestige, which is nice, It's an established field. So for certain people, it could make it a lot easier because the roadmaps have already been drawn, et cetera, et cetera. But 2 years goes by, and in the back of this person's head, they're like, well, I know I want to be an artist. I wish I was sitting on the beach and painting a beautiful canvas of the ocean. But here I'm dealing with quite stressful legal work. And then eventually their paralegal doesn't keep up with something, right? And they're like, I don't want to keep doing this. Now the paralegal didn't do their part. Now I have to stay an extra 2 hours. And you get kind of disgruntled towards the workers and your work. And you're like, I don't want to be doing this. I want to be just sitting on the beach, painting, et cetera, et cetera. And that causes an insidious and chronic, either micro or maybe macro stress as well, okay? Constantly. It's on constant full blast at that point. Because you're working like 8 to 10 hours a day. And then on top of that, you're driving to work, most people. So you're thinking about work when you're driving there, and driving back from work, probably thinking about work again. So it's really like an all-day activity, okay? And if there's that story gap, like this person wants to be an artist, but they're a lawyer, and the wider the gap is, the more stress there will be on the central nervous system, and thus the more maladaptive behavior the person will have to form over time. And maladaptive behavior could take a myriad of different forms as well. A lot of people abuse food. They stress eat, and thus they gain a lot of weight, right? A lot of people drink. A lot of people take pharmaceutical drugs. A lot of people do more socially acceptable activities like drown themselves in more work, et cetera, and or maybe work out a lot, disappear in the gym. Those are more like the work part, especially in the US, because it's a work culture. It's a culture that incentivizes you to identify your whole entire existence based on what you do for work. So it's more acceptable, and these people might actually become far more successful in the public eye, but really they know, not saying every single person is, but when you're using it as a compensation to avoid and distract yourself, to create some dissociation and distance between having this story gap in your life, okay? And the story gaps can vary. It could be at work, it could be at home, it could be maybe with yourself as well, comparing yourself to like a fantasy self. That's common with a lot of people. And obviously this fantasy self is most oftentimes never realistic. And even in some rare situations when the fantasy self is achieved, the image, usually the people just increase their standards. And then once again, they're back into this cycle of like, it's not enough, it's not good enough, et cetera, I need to do more. And that's also like an insidious way of like the central nervous system getting you to survive better as well. Because if you're constantly striving for more in the external world, although it might kill you at a spiritual level at a certain point, at a biological level will enhance your survival and ability to reproduce, because you'll be able to most often just hoard more materialistic possessions, etc., hoard more money, stuff of that sort. So story gap. And story gap is tough because it creates those micro stressors that are constantly and chronic. And the central nervous system does not do a good job at managing those micro stressors. Remember, you guys, that's the thing. That's what I found, especially with stress eating. Once you eliminate a person's micro stressors or reduce the load a tremendous amount, the stress eating actually pretty much almost always disappears. In almost 19 or 20 years of helping patients with extreme stubborn weight issues and health issues. And also I've been kind of doing this indirectly for like 39 years already, because I was initially raised by my grandmother on a biodynamic farm in Ukraine and stuff of that sort. So that story gap, you got to make it as narrow as possible. Okay. If it's wide, that's going to create a lot of stress and burden on the central nervous system, which will force you to create maladaptive behavior to deal with that story gap. Okay. And also, the fact that your immune system will be suppressed, you'll be more susceptible to getting sick, maybe catching certain cancers as well, etc. So, okay. Number 3, done. All right. Number 4, actually, I kind of semi-mentioned it on number 3. It's the love-hate relationships. These love-hate relationships can happen at home at a personal level with family and friends, or they can happen at work as well. Let's use the work as an example. So a love-hate relationship is, let's say you go to work and there's this coworker, not that they're bad or good, but they just see problem solving a different way than you do. Or maybe they just suck. Sometimes they suck too, But nonetheless, you got to work with them. And you're constantly bickering and not seeing eye to eye with this person. And this is like 8 hours a day. And that creates those micro stressors. Sometimes macro as well, depending on how toxic the relationship is at work. And once again, that's gonna burden your central nervous system quite a bit, okay? And cause a stress response, which will inevitably, if it lasts long enough, force you to create maladaptive behavior. Okay, so that's number 4, something to consider in regards to stress and fat gain. These things are all important, guys, like super important, way more important than how you're going to structure your workout and your macros and your nutrition and stuff like that. These things that we're talking about here are what really set the foundation for your health journey. And if your foundation is broken or not well constructed, it doesn't make sense to try to build a house on top of it. It's silly. Anyone can understand these concepts. Like an 11-year-old child, I could explain to, and they'll understand these concepts. If your foundation is sand, you can't build a house on top of it. You know what I mean? You got to build a strong, sturdy foundation, and that strong, sturdy foundation is composed of a lot of materials. This, what we're covering here, being one of those materials. Okay, and this isn't going to be easy to do, but it's a must to consider when going on an honest health journey, when you're looking to find a complete resolution to your struggles, not when you're looking for like some false hope. You know what I mean? Like you feel a little bit better for a month or two, but then, you're back to where you are and probably in a steeper deficit. So another thing to consider, this brings us to number 5, is usually just having a lot of autonomy and freedom in your life actually reduces a person's stress a tremendous amount. So, like a person that's stuck in a certain situation and can't do anything about it seems to experience a lot more of a stress response than a person that can do something about it, or that has autonomy in their life or freedom in their life in general. So that's another thing to consider. All right. That one was actually very important to me because when I was graduating from college from the University of California, Irvine, I graduated in like 2009, and it was at the tail end of that mortgage collapse. And obviously the economy wasn't doing that well. A lot of people were getting laid off, et cetera, et cetera. I was already coaching through college, so I had a pretty good established business at that point. But a lot of my friends were telling me, like yours is a luxury business and no one's going to purchase it because no one is even getting jobs or whatever. You should just go get a corporate job or maybe join the military or something of that sort. but I knew autonomy was one of my core values. And even if I made a mistake, it would be my mistake. And I was okay with always taking personal accountability as well. Even a lot of times I even still held personal accountability when it wasn't my fault, because it still gives you the power to change. And I believe that is very, very powerful, not playing victim in anything you do in life. So autonomy, freedom of choice, that could be a great aid for certain people in decreasing their stress response a tremendous amount. Because you also, presuming you are very clear on your core values, can express yourself fully without having to wear masks. Because a lot of times when you're in a work occupation with a lot of bureaucracy and rules, inevitably this company is hiring you to mold around their core values, not the other way around. So you're going to have to wear various layers of masks. And wearing these masks does cause a stress response as well, because it once again puts you in this story gap. You're like this person, but now you have to be this actor 8 to 10 hours a day. And that's going to create those micro stressors, which are once again, over a long enough period, going to create a story gap, which then you'll have to create maladaptive behavior to deal with that story gap. That's it. And then you're going to most likely develop like health issues in a long enough time frame, weight issues because of stress eating from maladaptive behavior, etc., etc. So, let's see. Number 6, your training plays a big role in how stressed your body is too. So, obviously, like high intensity, I with none of my clients, I encourage them to do cardio outside of walking. Okay, even if at that, I definitely discourage them from doing high intensity training. I just don't think it's necessary at all for optimum health and optimum aesthetics, whichever is your goal, okay? I never do high intensity training personally and have like a very lean physique with great metabolic health 365 days a year. Obviously, program design is going to be very important as well. You want a program that emphasizes enough rest and a good balance between how much volume there is to allow enough biological adaptation, not only for your central nervous system, but also for your active and passive tissue as well. Active tissue being like your muscle tissue, passive tissue being kind of like your ligaments, tendons, intervertebral discs, etc., etc., okay? So that's important to consider. In terms of people's energy levels and current level of health, I think looking at the average American as a whole, which is about, I would say, 27% body fat, so it's obese, okay, very overworked, under 5 hours a day of sleep, very stressed out, once again, with that $800 to $1,000 in savings total, plus like a lot of work, etc., etc. So like a CrossFit class would probably not be ideal for this person, because remember, working out takes energy. It doesn't give you energy. You get a dopamine high oftentimes, but that's not giving you energy. It takes energy to work out. So if you're already in a negative deficit, if you're already in an adrenal fatigue state, those workouts are going to beat you down even more, okay? So it's something very important to consider. Stuff of that sort. So, okay. Let's see here. Okay, so another thing to consider, this is a little bit, I guess, more personal, but I really enjoy living a minimalist lifestyle because it's less clutter. Obviously, you have like larger savings as well because you're not buying a bunch of stuff. The average American spends $8,000 to $16,000 a year on non-essential expenses, mostly just eating out and alcohol, believe it or not. And that's a gargantuous amount of money for a lot of people. So, and they spend that without even thinking about it twice. And then they say like organic food is too expensive, which is about $5,000 a year for 2,000 calories of organic food daily. Now, $5,000 a year is too expensive, but wait, $8,000 to $16,000 a year spending on eating out and alcohol and subscription services and all that stuff, that's not too expensive, right? And this is a mind virus. It's an illness in the mind of the person that makes the person believe this is acceptable and leads them into behaviors that eventually deteriorate their biology and lead to a life of obesity, misery, and disease. So minimalist lifestyle, I like it. You got to decide if it's important for you. Obviously, decluttering your life is important too, and that goes with a minimalist lifestyle. Also, there's a lot you can do there. Creating systems, I think that's so important for saving a lot of time, especially with your health and fitness goals. Systems are so important because inevitably, unfortunately, just biology, just like your physiology and psychology, deteriorate quite quickly without you constantly attending to it. So if you don't have systems that automate things as much as possible and your goals take way too much time, you're not likely to be consistent with it, okay? Because eventually some kind of work project will happen or whatever, and everything will fall apart. And then 1 week will go by without you training and doing stuff, and then 2 weeks and 3 weeks, and all of a sudden it's like 5 years and you haven't done anything. Stuff of that sort. So automated systems are important. One thing, like for example, I do that is an automated system is when I get home, so like I get up in the morning and everything's fairly procedural. And remember, it's not procedural unless it's done every time, okay? So there needs to be some degree of accountability and discipline involved in your pursuits, some degree. How much of that degree is going to vary from person to person. But I get home from, I wake up, drink some tea, go to the gym, work out for about an hour and a half, come home. On a pan, I put parchment paper and put about 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds of meat on there with a bunch of vegetables, put it in the oven. And I'm taking a shower. While I'm taking a shower, the food is cooking. I'm not even attending to it. And then I get out, the food is done for the day. I put it in 3 glass Tupperware containers, eat the first one right away, and then the other 2 I save for later. I put it in the refrigerator and then just heat it up. Not in a microwave, but a toaster oven. And then eat those throughout the day. It takes like 5 minutes for me to make 3,000 calories, which is roughly what I eat per day, for the whole day. Anyone has 5 minutes, okay? And a lot of times it's not a time problem. People say they're too busy. Trust me, they're not. It's not a financial problem because they're spending way more money on funding a life of misery and disease. It's more of a core values problem. The person has a mind virus that can't let them see a healthier way. And sick people can't make healthy decisions, or they wouldn't be sick to begin with, okay? So that's important to consider. Okay, so I'm going to finish out these last 3. Try to do it a bit quick here. So another thing to consider is try to, if I haven't already hinted at it with these myriad of variables, try to view stress from a very broad, holistic perspective with multiple levels, okay? So there's mental stress, but there's also physical stress, like having back pain, having gut issues, having fatty liver disease, GERD, skin issues, eczema, whatever, a myriad of other things. Overtraining, overworking, being exposed to the myriad of biocides and environmental chemicals 24/7. All of these things are stressors on the body, okay, on the central nervous system. For my clients, I have them do an HAQ. I kind of tried to print this out of my parents' printer, but it was running out of ink. And the HAQ does a really good analysis of the various systems of the human body and which ones are strained. So you can see with this client here, these are supposed to be red, but they came in pink. You can see he has a tremendous amount of stressors. So then in the program, we would work on decreasing this burden on the central nervous system, and that will decrease the amount of exhaustion his body feels daily, and thus make it easier for him to work out, easier for him to live an enjoyable life, etc., and stuff of that sort. So you can see here, there are thyroid issues, adrenal issues, circulation issues. He has some kind of immune response as well. So maybe allergies or some maybe mold in the house. He has a lot of musculoskeletal issues, back pain, bone integrity issues, connective tissue issues, muscle and nerve issues. He also has a central nervous system issue and a prostate health issue, okay? So all of these have to be addressed. All of these have to be lowered to have that healthy, strong foundation. Like you can't build a good workout program and expect it to be sustainable while a person is dealing with all of these. That's not how it works, okay? Because once again, working out takes energy. It doesn't give energy. And if all of this stuff is draining your energy, what's left for the workout? Not that much. So HAQ. Okay. Another cool thing to approach stress from is the Enneagram. I love the Enneagram, and it's a personality test, okay? It's been around for thousands of years. It's developed in Eastern Europe. I forgot the guy's exact name, but there's a really good website called innercompass9.com, and I think they're charging $59, $49. I forget exactly. I haven't been on the website for a long time. But you can take that Enneagram test and it can give you your personality type and subtypes, okay? So there are 9 different personality types, and inevitably everyone is all 9, but various degrees of them, and everyone is always leaning heavily on their one core type, okay? So that test could be a great resource for a lot of people because the personality is kind of like the software. And your body's kind of like the hardware, okay? The hardware does what the software does. So if you have like a mind virus or don't know how to manage your personality type in particular well, that might be a great resource for you because it gives you what your personality type is and what are the unhealthy versions and healthy versions of your personality type. So as you learn those, you learn to be more consciously aware of when you're headed down unsustainable paths, thinking patterns, behavior patterns, etc., and when you are headed down sustainable and healthy paths. And this is critical. And this is more to do with like your conditioned self, or some psychologists refer to, especially as Stefan Wolinski, as your false self. But it's a great start, okay, to learn how to manage your false self or to actually learn how to more accurately perceive the actions of your false self and when that false self is headed down sustainable and unsustainable patterns. Okay. So you can check out innercompass9.com. There's also a great book on, I would take that test first personally. I have my clients take that test. It's included as part of the program. And I work extensively with them at identifying their personality type and then how to manage it in sustainable ways. Because remember, in order to cure someone of a chronic disease, you have to change the person that's causing the disease. That's it. So that's really the key, the foundation. There's more to it than that, but that's the foundation to change, okay? And then the last thing is, it's not for everyone, and this is kind of more for probably a person that's been on the journey for quite a long time and looking to finalize, and solidify their journey. Everyone is going to be different here. So this is just what's worked for me personally. But the studying of quantum psychology, especially through Stefan Wolinski, can be a great resource as well at identifying your false self, then tying it back to your false core, and then eventually just going into really identifying yourself with being the observer of the mind and body versus actually the contents of the mind or body. So there are a lot of great books there. I have actually one right in front of me here. This is one of my favorites. Easier to read. Some of his books are a little bit tougher, but some of his other books that I really like are The Tao of Chaos, Intimate Relationships, Why They Do and Do Not Work. I think that's a great read as well. Waking from the Trance, a practical course for developing multidimensional awareness. This is an audiobook on Amazon. And I would recommend listening to this audiobook while reading his books. It'll help clarify a lot of the ideas. And you probably would have to listen to it multiple times. Like I've listened, I think it's like I don't know, I forgot already at this point, but 10 to 12 hour audio. I listened to it probably like 30 times over already, over the span of already 10 years or so. So I've been studying it for quite a while. And then one of my favorite books of his is actually You Are Not, okay? And these all could be great resources at, once again, getting rid of these mind viruses, which lead people to maladaptive behavior, which lead people to a life of normalized mental and physical illness their whole life. And a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't even see it as an illness. So, guys, there are so many more topics we can talk about, but these 10 are great starting points to get you thinking about how could I approach, my fat loss journey or my health journey from like I mentioned here, a multidimensional vantage point, okay? Because inevitably the human body and mind are a system of systems, okay? And it's important to attend to all these systems. And most importantly, it's important to meet the problem at the level of the problem. That's key, right? Because if you're not meeting the problem at the level of the problem will always persist, no matter how much you wish it didn't. So, like for most people in the fat loss arena, they think their problem is at the biological level. They think it's that they're eating poorly. It's that they are not working out enough. Or some think it's their genes. Foolishly, especially the third one. And I could tell you there are no absolutes. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes it is the case, but rarely is that the real problem, okay? And oftentimes people use diet and exercise as a symptom management approach to fat loss, and that's why it never works. And if you look up stats of relapse rate with fat loss programs that approach it from like, I just need to eat better and work out more, or I need to take a medical drug, you could do a 2-year follow-up and you will see 95+% of people relapse. They regain all their weight every time. That's because they're not meeting the problem at the level of the problem. And then the problem persists, okay? So it's pretty simple, really, at the end of the day. So I hope this was informative. And I wish you guys the best this weekend. I know year's coming to an end as well. So I hope you guys had a good, I'm going to try to do one more live before the end of the year, but I hope you guys have had a great year, 2024. And then obviously wishing you guys the absolute best for 2025 as well, okay? David, good to see you. Gabriel, I saw a lot of other people jumped in. Gene, John, how are you guys doing? Vincent, Justin, Delvis, Lisa, John, Emilio, okay, and a bunch of other people. But great to see you guys, okay? Thank you for jumping in, and have a good weekend, everyone.